Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the QX Financial YouTube podcast. I'm Nathan Bigley with QX Financial, and today we are joined again by estate planning professional, Phil Shekerlian. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. So I understand today we're going to be talking about asset protection and the different strategies that you can use to stay away from creditors, predators, and fraud.
Absolutely.
Please remember to like, comment, and share on this video if you get some knowledge from it, and subscribe to our channel so you can stay tuned in to all the new videos. All right, Phil. So what are we talking about today?
So as promised in the last video, one of the types of irrevocable trusts that you can set up is for asset protection. There are other ways to protect your assets, and we'll go into those in more detail today. So what are the reasons most people don't actually know too much about asset protection? So what are the reasons that most people would need it? You know, if you're starting a business, if you're providing a service or a product to the public, you are now exposing yourself to risk. If it is a product and that product injures somebody in some way, you could be sued. And if you're sued and you don't have your assets protected, they can take your home, car, things like that. If you are providing a service and you make a mistake on your service, you could cause, again, injury and be sued as well. You could also be sued for other things than starting a business, such as a car accident. A lot of what we see here in Southern California is a lot of people have rental real estate and they rent it out to another family or an individual. And if the owner of that property, if you're the owner of that rental property and you don't maintain that property properly, then you could be sued for injuring somebody. If a staircase falls, or if there's an electrical fire, or if there's mold in the house, things like that, you may need to protect your assets from a bankruptcy. You may find yourself sometime down the line and need a filing bankruptcy. And if you have assets in a bankruptcy, they can typically be taken. There's special rules for necessities, kind of like we talked about with the Medi-Cal planning, things like your home and car and things that are necessities, but sometimes other assets can be taken from you. And then this one may not be as common, but I have seen it, is if you're in a fight, if you get in an altercation with somebody else and injure them, you could be sued for that. And so you want to make sure you're protected. You may have, I touched on this last video with the undue influence, but you may have family trying to take advantage of you, whether it's because you're old and your brain isn't as sharp, or you have Alzheimer's or dementia, or they just really trick you and manipulate you into doing stuff. You want to make sure those assets are protected from family as well. So those are the reasons that you would need asset protection. But what kind of assets can you protect? Well, it's really everything. It can be your cars, your home, any other real estate you own, savings and checking accounts, investments, jewelry, furniture, all types of things like that. Even your wages. Your wages can be garnished as well. So those are the types of things that I'm talking about protecting.
Pretty much anything with value.
Anything that has value to you, correct. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit more about liability. So I had mentioned a couple of different circumstances where you could be liable, but there's three types of liability out there. You have what's called a tort liability, which is civil wrongdoings. If somebody were to injure you in a way that's not criminal. So for instance, I accidentally bump into you in the street and I knock you down and you break your hip. Okay. Right. I didn't mean to knock you down and break your hip, so it's not criminal. But the fact of the matter is I did that damage to you. Therefore, you could try to sue me. Yeah. So that's a civil or tort type of liability. The most common type there is negligence. Somebody was negligent, did something that they shouldn't have, but didn't mean to. And that's what gives rise to tort liability.
And I actually just spoke to somebody about a week ago that mentioned, I think, is what a tort happened to them. They opened their car door and a biker was flying down the street and door hit the biker. I think the guy broke his leg, and he's going through some trouble now. I think that would fall into that category.
Absolutely. You never know. I mean, things happen out of accident and mistake, and it could happen to you at any time. And so if you have assets that you're worried about, losing, then you should protect them. Make the proper steps necessary.
Yeah.
The second type of liability is a criminal liability. That would be, if back to that scenario where you fell and broke your hip, if I pushed you intentionally and I meant to cause you harm, that would be an assault and a battery, and that would be criminal liability as well. Another type of liability is contract liability. So this is where you enter into a lease to rent a home or an office space or whatever the case may be, but for whatever reason you can't afford to pay it anymore, or you decide to stop paying it. You are still contractually liable to carry out the rest of those payments. And if you don't, you can be sued for up to the amount of those payments plus any costs that it took the person suing you to recover those. And any other type of debts you have, that's financial liability, credit cards, anything along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
In order to get protection, you have to follow certain formalities. You can set up a trust or a business or, move your assets offshore, whatever the case may be. But if you don't follow the right formalities, none of that's going to work for you, and that'll all be invalidated. So the first formality that you need is you need to start with a correct structure. For some people, it may be a trust. Some people, it may be a business. There may be, there's many other types of ways to do asset protection. And each individual has their own unique circumstances that has to be taken into account when deciding what the proper structure is. Then once you have the structure in place, you have to follow all the proper rules. Otherwise, you lose your protection. One thing that may or may not be common is something called piercing. Piercing the corporate veil or just piercing in general. And what that means is that somebody, for instance, set up a corporation, put some assets in there for protection, or they run a business out of there for whatever reason, and they are sued through that business. Well, if the person that set up the corporation treated that business as an alter ego, was moving money back and forth and paying for personal expenses with the business, and just commingling everything, not following the proper paperwork, filing requirements, insurance requirements, things like that, then the person suing you could actually pierce through that business and get to your personal assets, such as your home and investments. So you really need to follow all of the rules to make sure that there is no piercing.
Right.
One of the most common ones is it's not adequately funding whatever the entity is. So if it's a trust or business or whatever. And what that means is, let's say you do have a business and you sell lemonade on a lemonade stand. Okay. You need to make sure that you keep enough money in that business bank account to buy a lemonade stand, buy the product to make your lemonade, and then sit out there and sell lemonade. Well, your lemonade could potentially get somebody sick. It's probably not going to kill them, but it could get somebody sick. So you should also have adequate funding to pay for some doctor visits or some Pepto-Bismol or whatever the case may be for somebody they got sick from your lemonade.
Right.
If you don't, and you just drain all the money out of that corporate bank account and put it in your personal bank account, your business entity can be pierced for that reason.
I see. So you have to be ready for anything.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's important to clarify, none of the business structures will protect you from personal wrongdoing. So I'm an attorney. I have a corporation and I run all of my business through my corporation. If for whatever reason my staff were to make a mistake, and somebody decides to sue my corporation because my staff made a mistake, I follow all the formalities so they couldn't pierce through my corporate veil and get to my personal asset. But if I personally made a mistake, then they can sue the business and they can sue me personally, because whether or not I'm running through a business, I personally made that mistake. Mm-hmm. So it's important to know that if you are offering a service and you have liability or exposure for a service mistake, then you need to have the proper insurance for that as well. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think it's E&O insurance.
Yeah, E&O or professional liability or whatever it is for what you're doing.
Right. Okay.
So the goal of asset protection is there's no bulletproof asset protection. The goal is just to make it much more difficult and much more costly for somebody to come after your assets.
Right.
And how far you want to go is up to you. If you want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to put this just intricate asset protection plan in place, you can, and it's going to be pretty darn close to bulletproof. Mm-hmm. But if you just want to do basic asset protection planning, it may help or it may not help.
Right.
It's, based on your individual goals, your assets, and what your exposure is.
And that makes sense because you look at some of the major corporations, they probably spend a lot of money making sure that the liability isn't, placed on themselves. Absolutely. Pretty big shield there, pretty hard one to pierce through, versus the small business owner who may just want to put up, as much shield as they can afford and make it as difficult to reach them as possible. There's kind of that sliding scale there.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
And then I'm going to wrap up today's video. I have a lot more to talk about on asset protection, but I'm going to wrap up today's video by starting off with the first strategy for asset protection. This is probably the most common one out there, and it's by starting a business. Whether you're starting an actual operating business or just a business for asset protection makes a difference. If you're actually starting a business, you want to make sure that your assets are protected, that you pay, as little taxes as possible, and then ensure that your business model is sustainable and that you can actually keep that business going for years on end, and that it's not going to collapse because you have too many expenses.
Right.
If you are not running an operating business and you just want to protect your assets, then the goal is to protect those assets and pay as little amount of taxes as possible. So there's two different ways to set that up. And there's many different business structures that can be set up. You have corporations, LLCs, limited partnerships, general partnerships, limited liability companies, and even potentially a DBA. And then you have sole proprietorships as well. But we will talk about all of those business types in more detail in a future video.
Very exciting, and with the strong entrepreneurial spirit that there is out there and the accessibility to being able to start a business right from your cell phone nowadays, I think this upcoming video will be very interesting to our viewers. So stay tuned. I'm excited to learn more about it.
Thanks for having me today.
Thanks a lot, Phil. Thank you for watching the video today. I hope you got a ton of good information from Phil on asset protection. Please remember to like, share, and comment this video if you got something out of it, and subscribe to the QX Financial YouTube channel so you can stay up to date with all of our new content. Phil's contact information will be at the bottom if you want to reach out to him. I highly recommend you do that, as he's doing free consultations with all of our viewers. Take advantage. Bye-bye. The commentary provided in this video is for informational and educational purposes only. No advice, offer, or solicitation of any kind, expressed or implied, is being given. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of QX Financial, any subsidiaries, or associates thereof. When considering making any changes to your situation, you should consult a competent licensed professional. All rights reserved. Copyright September 17th, 2020.
This information is not intended and should not be taken as legal advice for any particular set of facts or circumstances. You should contact an attorney directly for advice with specific legal problems. None of this information creates an attorney-client relationship with the law offices of Phil Shekerlian.